In a world veiled in shadows, where fear clung to the air like fog on a moor, whispers stirred in the ancient halls of wizarding kind. The times were dark, darker than many dared admit aloud. Families vanished in the night. Murmured names brought silence to conversations. And in every corner of the magical world, hearts beat faster when the name Voldemort was spoken, if it was spoken at all. But even in the bleakest moments, hope has a way of threading itself through the fabric of despair. It began with a prophecy, spoken in secret and barely understood even by those who guarded it. In the back room of the Hog's Head Inn, where dust clung to windows and secrets moved like shadows on stone, a seer's trembling voice foretold the rise of a child, a boy born as the seventh month dies. To parents who had defied the Dark Lord 3 times, a child with the power to vanquish him. Many dismissed it, others obsessed over it, and one man, consumed by fear of his own demise, marked it as a threat to be destroyed. Somewhere far from the grand halls of prophecy and power, in a sleepy village untouched by politics or prophecy, a baby was born beneath the stars. Godric's Hollow was a quiet place nestled in the English countryside, where the wind carried the scent of chimney smoke and the laughter of children echoed down cobbled lanes. There, in a small ivy-covered cottage with flowers blooming in the windowsill, Lily Potter gave birth to her son, Harry James Potter. He was tiny, red-cheeked, and wrapped in soft blankets knitted by hand. His mother's eyes, vivid green and filled with wonder, were the first thing he saw. His father, James, beamed with pride, his untidy hair fallen across his forehead as he leaned in to whisper to his newborn son. In those precious moments, the world was simple. There was love, there was warmth, there was safety. But peace in those days was fleeting. Even as the Potters celebrated the miracle of new life, the darkness crept closer. Lord Voldemort, the most feared sorcerer in generations, had heard the prophecy. He believed he had found the child of his undoing. Fueled by paranoia, power, and a twisted obsession with destiny, he set his course for Godric's Hollow. That very night, cloaked in silence, he came. The moon hung high, casting pale light over the thatched roofs. Inside the cottage, James Potter was the first to fall, wandless, unprepared, but fiercely determined to give Lily and Harry a chance. He fought with nothing but the raw force of love and courage, and he fell where he stood. Upstairs, Lily held Harry close to her chest. The walls trembled, the floor creaked under the weight of death. She could have stepped aside, could have saved herself, but she didn't. Her final moments were filled with a mother's love so fierce, so pure, that it bent the very laws of magic. As Voldemort raised his wand, she made a choice, one that would echo through time. Her sacrifice became a shield, an ancient and powerful enchantment rooted not in spell work, but in love. The killing curse, Avada Kedavra, flew, a flash of green, a scream, and then silence. But when the dust settled, Voldemort was gone, his body destroyed, his soul fractured, and the child, the boy he meant to kill, still lived. Lying in his crib, a single lightning bolt scorched across his forehead, Harry Potter breathed in the dawn of a new era. Alone in the wreckage of his home, he slept quietly, unaware of the miracle he embodied. The world would soon know his name. By morning, the news had spread like wildfire. The boy who lived, the child who survived the Dark Lord's wrath. He was an infant, too young to understand what had happened, too young to know that the course of wizarding history had changed because of him. Some called it destiny, others called it coincidence. But in the hearts of many, Harry became something more than a symbol. He became hope. Wizards and witches celebrated in the streets. Goblets were raised. Fireworks danced across skies. Yet amid the revelry, there were those who understood that nothing, not even Voldemort's fall, was truly the end. For magic, like people, leaves echoes, and darkness once cast does not disappear so easily. Harry was taken from the ruins by Hagrid, the gentle half-giant with a heart as wide as the sky. Wrapped in blankets and tucked in the crook of his arm, Harry was flown to Privet Drive, to the doorstep of his last living relatives, the Dursleys. There, under the watchful eyes of Albus Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, he was left with a letter and a future still unwritten. No one could know what the boy would grow to become. Hero? Tragedy? Legend? But one truth remained, as certain as the stars. The path ahead would be one of hardship and choice, of loyalty and loss. The mark on his forehead would not just be a scar. It would be a beacon, a symbol of resistance, a reminder of sacrifice, and the weight of a prophecy that began long before his birth. For now, he was just a baby, sleeping under the sky, as autumn leaves danced through the air. But in the wizarding world, the gears of fate had begun to turn, and so begins the story of Harry Potter, the boy born under prophecy, touched by darkness, guarded by love, and destined for a life far greater than he could ever imagine. Years passed since that fateful night in Godric's Hollow. The world remembered. Wizards marked the fall of Voldemort with celebrations and ceremonies, with chocolate frog cards and whispered legends about the boy who lived. But the boy himself, Harry Potter, lived far away from all of it. Not in a castle, not among the books and broomsticks of Hogwarts, but in the smallest room of a very ordinary house on the most ordinary street in England. Number 4, Privet Drive. To the outside world, the Dursleys were a perfectly respectable family. Vernon Dursley ran a firm that sold drills and believed firmly in rules, neckties, and things that made sense. His wife Petunia kept a spotless home and a sharp tongue, always pretending she didn't have a sister who had been anything other than tragically normal. Their son, Dudley, was a spoiled storm of tantrums, toy guns, and birthday presents. And in the cupboard under the stairs, behind brooms, broken vacuum parts, and dust, lived Harry. No one spoke much about Harry, not to neighbors, not to teachers. He was just the nephew, a quiet boy with untidy black hair and old glasses held together by tape. He had no photos on the walls, no birthday parties, no friends. He wore Dudley's hand-me-downs, which hung off his small frame like rags. Every day began with chores and ended with silence. Bang! A door slams. Vernon yells, "Dudley demands breakfast." In the cramped darkness of the cupboard, Harry sits awake, already dressed before anyone else stirs. He learned long ago not to complain. He learned to listen quietly, to move silently, to survive. He did not know he was famous. He did not know that the scar on his forehead was more than just a strange mark, that it was a curse breaker, a talisman, a prophecy's fingerprint. All he knew was that he was different. Sometimes strange things happened around Harry. When Dudley shoved him, Harry somehow ended up on the roof of the school kitchen. When Petunia chopped his hair in fury, it grew back overnight. When he was scolded for ruining a family photo, though He hadn't even touched it. The glass mysteriously cracked down the middle. Each time, the Dursleys grew more afraid, more hateful. They told him he was a freak, that his parents had died in a car crash, that his strangeness was something to be shamed, punished, hidden away. But magic, even when buried, begins to hum. In the solitude of his cupboard, Harry began to dream, not just the hazy dreams of children, but vivid flashes of green light and cold laughter. He sometimes heard a woman's voice, warm, fierce, pleading. He woke with his heart pounding and no answers, no comfort, no one to explain what it all meant. Each summer, he watched as the Dursleys packed for trips to the seaside or zoo, leaving him behind with nothing but a can of soup and a locked door. He wandered the house, careful not to be seen, opening dusty books and imagining other lives. He read fantasy novels late at night with a flashlight, not knowing that real magic, his magic, was waiting just beyond the page. He longed for something he couldn't name, a place where he wasn't the unwanted boy in oversized clothes, a world where cupboards didn't double as bedrooms, a family that didn't flinch at the sight of him. His heart learned patience, a quiet, powerful kind, forged through years of loneliness. Then, one summer morning, everything changed. It began with a letter, not delivered by the usual postman, not shoved rudely through the letterbox like bills and takeaway menus. This envelope was thick, creamy, and heavy, sealed with a wax crest bearing a lion, snake, badger, and eagle. To Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Harry's hands trembled as he read the address. Someone knew, not just his name, but where he slept, the tiny space he was never allowed to speak of. Someone had seen him, but the letter was snatched away before he could open it. Vernon turned red, then purple. Petunia hissed like a kettle left on the stove too long. They burned the letter. Then more came, dozens, hundreds, flooding the fireplace, carried by owls that circled the house like silent sentinels. The air itself buzzed with a force none of them could deny. Harry didn't understand what was happening, only that something powerful had taken notice of him at last. He was no longer invisible. The Dursleys fled in panic, dragging Harry to the edge of the country, to a lonely shack on a rock surrounded by churning waves. Storm clouds raged, the wind howled, and then, boom! The door flew open. A giant of a man filled the frame. Wild hair, beetle-black eyes, a coat made of something that might have once been a bear. He looked down at Harry, not with disdain, but with wonder, with pride. "Harry, you're a wizard." The words hung in the air, impossibly strange, yet somehow they felt right, like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. For the first time, Harry felt seen, known, wanted. He wasn't just a neglected boy under the stairs. He was part of something far older and far greater than he could have imagined. A magical world with flying broomsticks, talking portraits, and a school named Hogwarts. A world where the name Harry Potter carried weight. A world that had been waiting for him. And so, under a sky full of summer stars, the boy once hidden from magic was carried back to it, to his rightful place, to the beginning of a journey that would test everything within him: heart, courage, and the strength to choose light in the face of darkness. A cupboard no longer confined him. A letter had found him, and destiny had come knocking at last. The platform was hidden from ordinary sight, a secret nestled between platforms 9 and 10, invisible to all but those who belonged to the world behind the veil. As Harry stepped through the barrier at King's Cross Station and onto platform 9 3/4, the clang and hiss of a scarlet steam engine greeted him like a long-lost lullaby. The Hogwarts Express stood proud and gleaming under the golden morning light, its windows catching the glint of magic and promise. Smoke curled lazily into the air, carrying with it the scent of polished wood, sugar, and something ancient, something waiting. Harry hesitated only a moment. His heart thudded in his chest, and the weight of 11 quiet, unloved years tugged at his sleeve like a shadow. But then Ron Weasley smiled at him with an easy, open grin, and Hermione Granger, book in hand, offered a thoughtful word and an eager question. The boy who had once lived under the stairs climbed aboard the train and entered his first real chapter. The journey north was a gentle enchantment all its own. Rolling green fields gave way to moors, forests, and winding rivers. Students filled the compartments with laughter and stories, tales of spells gone wrong, wizard sweets that made your nose whistle, and rumors of what awaited inside the castle's ancient stone walls. Harry watched it all through the glass, cheek pressed to the window, as if afraid it might disappear if he blinked. And then, as evening fell and the sky blushed into dusk, they saw it, Hogwarts Castle, rising in silhouette against the horizon. Turrets and towers glowed with warm golden light, casting reflections onto the black glass surface of the lake. It looked like a place out of dreams, not just the kind told in fairy tales, but dreams he had whispered to himself on sleepless nights in the cupboard, hoping, always hoping, for something more. That first crossing by boat was silent and holy. The stars shimmered above, mirrored below as the castle drew nearer. And as they stepped into the grand entrance hall, echoing with centuries of footsteps, Harry felt something click quietly into place inside him, as if his soul had recognized its home before his mind did. The sorting hat, ancient and patched, rested on his head and peered deep into the corners of his heart. It saw the courage, yes, but also the pain, the longing, the strength not yet realized. It whispered options, Slytherin perhaps, but Harry's quiet plea not to be placed there, born not out of hatred but instinct, guided the final call. Gryffindor! Cheers erupted. The house banners above turned crimson and gold. He had found his first family. Over time, the strangeness of this new world gave way to belonging. Classes were not just lessons. They were journeys into wonder. In charms, feathers floated on command, and laughter followed each failed flick of the wand. In potions, cauldrons bubbled with secrets, and Professor Snape's cold gaze made Harry's skin prickle with questions. Transfiguration turned matchsticks into needles, and every moment was another layer pulled back from a world Harry had only glimpsed in dreams. And then there was Quidditch. The sky became a second home, one of wind and adrenaline and heart-thundering speed. Mounted on a broom, chasing the glittering golden snitch, Harry felt lighter than he ever had, like he had shed the heaviness of those lost years and soared as the boy he was always meant to be. Yet Hogwarts, like magic itself, held more than delight. There were whispers in the corridors, locked doors that shouldn't be touched, a three-headed dog guarding something hidden on the third floor, clues unraveling like ancient riddles, and a name spoken with caution even among wizards, Voldemort. The name lingered like smoke. Harry learned that the past he had been denied was darker and more tangled than he imagined, that his parents had died not in a car crash, but in a war, that he had survived something that should have destroyed him, that someone, somewhere, wanted to finish what was started long ago. Guidance came not only from teachers, but from Hagrid, the gamekeeper whose affection was steady as stone, from Dumbledore, who watched with eyes filled with knowing, from Ron, who stood beside him no matter how frightened he was, and from Hermione, whose brilliant mind and fierce heart helped them all find the right path, even when it led into danger. One night, under the flickering torchlight of a forgotten corridor, they faced tests meant for those far older, a deadly chess match, potions laced with poison, a riddle, a trap, a stone of unimaginable power, the philosopher's stone, hidden deep beneath the school to keep it from dark hands. In the final chamber, Harry stood alone before a man who was not quite a man, a host to Voldemort's withered soul. With shaking hands and burning scar, he stood not as the boy who lived, but as a child armed with courage, love, and sacrifice. He did not strike with violence. He resisted. He endured. In the end, it was not power that saved him, but his mother's gift, the unbreakable protection of love, etched into his very skin. When Harry awoke in the hospital wing, Dumbledore sat beside him. They spoke not just of magic and stones and evil, but of truth, of the strange power of choice, of how even a mirror that shows your heart's desire can be a dangerous thing, of how what lies beneath the surface, love, bravery, loyalty, often matters more than what's seen above. The school year came to an end. Suitcases were packed, trains whistled, but Harry returned to the Dursleys not as a prisoner of silence, but as a boy with light in his eyes and friends in his heart. He carried more than books and sweets from Diagon Alley. He carried knowledge, strength, and a quiet fire kindled deep within. He was no longer just a boy from a cupboard. He had faced the shadows. He had protected something precious, and he had begun to understand the truth that would shape the rest of his journey. Even the most ordinary child, when armed with love, friendship, and courage, can stand against the darkness. Summer had returned. But this time, Harry didn't feel like just a boy in oversized clothes locked behind a cupboard door. He had found a second home, a magical world, a circle of friends, and the growing understanding of who he really was. But the Dursleys remained the Dursleys. Trapped again in Privet Drive, Harry was treated as if Hogwarts had been nothing more than a fever dream. His letters were intercepted, his birthday forgotten. The bars on his window echoed the bars that once wrapped around his childhood. Just as hopelessness began to creep back in, a strange sound shattered the silence. Clink, clatter, squeak. A pair of saucer-like eyes peeked through the darkness. Dobby, a house elf, trembling with urgency and guilt, arrived with a warning: do not go back to Hogwarts. Harry didn't understand why. Only that Dobby spoke of danger, of plots that would endanger lives. And when Harry refused to heed the warning, determined to return to the only place he felt alive, Dobby ensured the Dursleys locked him away for good. By the time Harry boarded the Hogwarts Express that summer, he no longer feared what the world might think of him. He had faced suspicion, loneliness, and the shadows of a past not his own. And he had emerged stronger. He sat with Ron and Hermione in the warm light of the train compartment, the countryside rolling by. They laughed about Lockhart's memory loss, about enchanted Valentine's dwarves, about Quidditch wins and Polyjuice disasters. But beneath the jokes was a deeper bond, forged through trial and triumph. Harry stared out the window, not into the sky this time, but at the reflection of his friends beside him, and saw how far he had come. He was no longer just the boy who lived. He was the boy who chose to stand, the boy who protected the innocent, the boy who faced the past and refused to let it define him. And somewhere deep in his heart, beneath the scars and uncertainty, a quiet fire burned, the promise that whatever darkness may come next, he would face it head on, never alone. Harry entered his third year at Hogwarts not as a wide-eyed newcomer, nor as the boy who had simply survived great odds, but as someone now beginning to understand how complicated and dangerous the magical world could truly be. He had bested a basilisk, destroyed a cursed diary, and even touched the echoes of Lord Voldemort's former self. Yet, as the summer faded and the golden leaves of autumn began to fall, a new fear gripped the wizarding world. Sirius Black had escaped Azkaban. News of Black's escape wasn't just a headline, it was a storm cloud looming over Harry's every step. Rumors swirled through the wizarding community like wildfire. The Ministry of Magic was in a panic, and for the first time, Harry noticed the adults around him weren't just concerned, they were afraid. The story, as Harry overheard it, was grim. Sirius Black had been a follower of Voldemort, a traitor, who had handed over James and Lily Potter to their deaths. Now, everyone said, he had broken free of the most secure prison in the wizarding world for one reason only, to finish what he started and kill Harry Potter. Returning to Hogwarts that term didn't bring the same sense of comfort it once had. The school was guarded by Dementors, wraith-like creatures, pale and robed, whose very presence made the air freeze and despair cling to the heart. They were stationed at the gates and patrolled the grounds, supposedly to protect students, but their effect on Harry was immediate and severe. Each time one came near, Harry collapsed under the weight of a memory he could barely recall. His mother's last scream, the hollow voice of Voldemort, the echo of death. Despite the gloom, there was light. A new defense against the dark arts professor arrived, Remus Lupin, a kind, quietly brilliant man who immediately earned the trust of his students. Where past teachers had brought chaos or fear, Lupin brought calm, guidance, and understanding. He taught his students to fight fear with knowledge and laughter, and to face their darkness not by denying it, but by meeting it with courage. For Harry, Lupin became more than a teacher. He was a connection to the past, someone who had known his parents, who spoke of them with affection and humanity, rather than reverence. As winter closed in, Hogwarts transformed under snow and song, but inside Harry, something stirred that could not be warmed by firelight. The presence of the Dementors still haunted him. To help, Lupin began to train Harry privately in a powerful and difficult charm, Expecto Patronum. The Patronus charm was not simply a spell, but a manifestation of one's happiest memory, turned into a protective force of light. At first, Harry struggled, for his happiest memory was a ghost of voices he barely remembered. But slowly, with time, and with Hermione and Ron's support, Harry found something to hold on to: the laughter of friends, the warmth of the burrow, the feeling of flying free. And when he finally cast his Patronus, a majestic silver stag, It was like seeing a piece of his father return. That stag, antlered and proud, wasn't just a spell. It was a legacy. But the year held more than magical trials. In secret passages and whispered conversations, Harry learned that the truth was not what it seemed. Sirius Black, the man believed to be his parents' betrayer, had never been their enemy. The real traitor was Peter Pettigrew, a man who had faked his own death and lived in hiding as Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, for years. When this truth was uncovered, when Sirius confronted Peter and Harry, Ron, and Hermione bore witness, it was as though a veil had been lifted. The confrontation took place in the Shrieking Shack, the most haunted building in Britain, beneath the full moon's gaze, and it was there that truth, betrayal, forgiveness, and sorrow collided. Sirius wasn't a monster. He had been James Potter's best friend, Harry's godfather, and he had spent 12 years imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. Harry, aching for a family he never had, felt hope bloom in his chest. For a moment, he dared to believe he wouldn't have to return to the Dursleys, that he could live with someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had survived. But fate had other plans. As the moon rose, Professor Lupin, Harry's mentor and friend, transformed into a werewolf. In the chaos that followed, Pettigrew escaped. Sirius was captured. Hope, so recently born, seemed crushed under the weight of cruel inevitability. But Harry and Hermione, with the help of a magical device known as a time turner, raced against time itself to put things right. In a breathtaking series of events, they freed Sirius and saved Buckbeak, a proud hippogriff sentenced to death. In the stillness that followed, Harry stood on the shore of the Black Lake, his Patronus shimmering in the distance. He had watched himself save his own life. He had understood what it meant to believe in himself, to wield his magic not with fear, but with purpose. As summer came and the train pulled away from the castle, Harry looked out not with dread, but with quiet strength. Sirius, though still a fugitive, had given him something no one else could, a sense of belonging. He wasn't alone in the world. He was part of a story bigger than tragedy. He carried with him memories of laughter and sorrow, of transformation and trust. He had faced fear, met it with his own light, and discovered that courage is not the absence of darkness, but the refusal to let it rule. And somewhere in the night, above Privet Drive, a black dog ran free beneath the stars, watching over the boy who was more than a survivor. He was a light in the dark. The 4th year of Harry Potter's magical education dawned not with the predictable rhythm of classes and corridors, but with an exhilarating promise, the revival of the legendary Triwizard Tournament. It was to be a year like no other, one that would test not only magical skill and cleverness, but also the very fabric of Harry's character. Yet even the brightest of beginnings can hide the darkest of ends. Excitement coursed through the students of Hogwarts, Beauxbaton, and Durmstrang alike as banners were unfurled and foreign carriages landed with thunder and grace. The castle itself seemed to awaken in a new way, its ancient stones buzzing with anticipation. Harry, now accustomed to the unexpected, had no thought of entering the competition. His name, unsubmitted and unwelcome, emerged from the goblet of fire like a curse, a magical contract that could not be undone. He was 14, too young, unprepared, but chosen nonetheless. The first task arrived like a roar in the distance. Dragons. Each champion would face one alone. Harry drew the Hungarian horntail, perhaps the most fearsome of them all. In the arena, stone walls rose around him, and cheers echoed like distant thunder. With only his wand and his wits, Harry soared into the sky on his broom, narrowly avoiding blasts of flame, searing talons, and death. What he discovered in those firelit skies was not just his resilience, but his will to protect, to survive not for glory, but for those who believed in him. Between tasks, Hogwarts was a sea of shifting loyalties. Even Ron, Harry's closest friend, briefly questioned the fairness of Harry's place in the tournament. That rift wounded more deeply than the dragon's fire ever could, but time and truth mended the pain. Their friendship, weathered now, became stronger and more real. The second task brought Harry into the cold, dark heart of the Black Lake. He plunged into the depths, gills enchanted to his skin, facing merfolk and underwater labyrinths. He found his friends suspended like sleeping spirits, and though the rules required him to save just one, he refused to leave any behind. That act, an unspoken defiance of selfishness, echoed Dumbledore's lessons, that courage is not always boldness, but compassion. As spring warmed the castle grounds, Harry prepared for the final task, a massive hedge maze grown wild and strange with magic. Its corridors twisted minds and blurred realities. There were no dragons, no drowning depths, but an invisible pressure that built with each step forward. The maze swallowed sound and time. Inside, Harry found not only magical creatures and enchanted traps, but something far more haunting, the isolation that comes with responsibility. At the maze's heart stood the Triwizard Cup, gleaming like victory. He reached it with Cedric Diggory, a fellow Hogwarts student, both of them bloodied but upright. Together, they grabbed the cup, a symbol of triumph, but it became a portal, a trap. They landed not in celebration, but in horror. A graveyard, silent and ancient. Shadows twisted in the fog, and there, with a whispered incantation and the cruelest of magics, Voldemort returned. His body, terrible and real, rose from ritual and sacrifice. Harry could only watch as Cedric, kind and strong, was struck down, murdered without a second thought. The world tilted and innocence fractured. Bound and bleeding, Harry faced Voldemort, not the memory, not a ghost, but the Dark Lord fully reborn. And yet, in the darkness of that moment, a strange miracle unfolded. Wands connected in a magical phenomenon, priori incantatem, a rare and powerful bond. From the joined beams of light emerged echoes of the dead. Cedric, Lily, James. Their presence gave Harry the strength to break the connection, to flee. He took Cedric's body and the truth and returned. He returned not to applause, but to silence. Hogwarts greeted him as a champion, but Harry bore the truth that many wished to ignore. Voldemort had returned, and nothing would ever be the same again. The ministry denied it. The Daily Prophet cast doubt. But Harry had seen. He had felt the presence of death and heard its voice. Even amidst the end-of-year celebrations, the Yule Ball memories, and the laughter echoing in the corridors, Harry remained changed. The world had opened a door it could no longer close. On the final night before leaving Hogwarts, Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat beneath the stars. No words, only the warmth of shared silence. Around them, the wind whispered through the trees like the breath of things still to come. They held hands, unknowingly bracing for a battle that was no longer looming, but unfolding. Because now the enemy had a name, a face, and power. And Harry knew it would take more than spells and courage to stand against the darkness. It would take love, and it would take sacrifice. Harry's 5th year at Hogwarts did not begin with joy, but with confusion, dread, and isolation. The wizarding world, once a place of mystery and wonder, had turned cold to him. After the graveyard, after Cedric's death and Voldemort's return, Harry expected truth to be embraced, but the Ministry of Magic silenced it. Denial became doctrine, and fear wrapped around the community like a vice. Back at Privet Drive, the summer was suffocating. Harry, confined again by Muggle rules and wizarding indifference, felt like a prisoner in a world that refused to believe him. Even the letters from Ron and Hermione seemed filtered through worry. Then came the sudden swirl of broomsticks and cloaks, rescuers from the Order of the Phoenix, whisking Harry away through the night sky. He arrived at number 12, Grimmauld Place, headquarters of a hidden resistance. There, Sirius Black waited, his godfather, caged by memories, and the house of his childhood became both comfort and mirror for Harry. They were 2 orphans, longing for family and freedom. The walls whispered of the past, and Harry realized the war was much closer than anyone would admit. When term resumed at Hogwarts, Harry hoped for refuge. Instead, he found a school transformed. Dolores Umbridge, pink-clad and cruel, arrived with smiles concealing sinister control. Appointed by the Ministry to monitor and suppress, she became a symbol of censorship. Her rule rewrote history, banned defense spells, and punished truth with searing pain, literally carving detentions into the backs of students' hands. Harry's anger boiled beneath his skin. Each lie, each cruelty, fed a fire within him that could not be quenched. But he was not alone. Hermione, sharp and resolute, planted the seed of rebellion. Together with Ron, they formed Dumbledore's army, a name chosen not just as defiance, but as hope. In a hidden room, protected by magic and secrecy, students gathered. Laughter returned. Wands flicked through the air with meaning. Harry taught his peers to cast defensive spells, to summon Patronuses, to believe in themselves. Here, under candlelight and whispered lessons, he was not the boy who lied or the chosen one. He was a leader, a brother in arms, a light in dark times. But shadows stretched long. Harry began to dream more vividly. Snakes slithered through his mind. He saw corridors and locked doors, visions that felt real. As the year pressed on, his connection to Voldemort deepened. Dumbledore, usually a guide, remained distant, cloaked in silence. Harry's frustration turned to fear as he realized the darkness inside him might not only be watching but stirring. One night, a dream sent shivers down his spine. Sirius Black, tortured behind a veil. Harry awoke certain it was true. Fueled by panic and devotion, he led his friends to the Department of Mysteries. The corridors of the Ministry, once seen only in newspapers, echoed with tension. In the Hall of Prophecies, truth took form. The orb he found held a message meant only for him, words that had shaped his life since birth. But before he could understand it, Death Eaters surrounded them. A battle ignited, fierce and terrible. Glass shattered, spells collided. His friends fought with the bravery he had once taught them. They were children, yes, but also warriors. Then came the moment that would cleave his heart. Sirius Black, dueling with elegance and fire, was struck by Bellatrix Lestrange's curse. He fell through the veil, gone with a whisper. One heartbeat, he was there. The next, he was not. Harry screamed, a sound not of pain, but of loss beyond words. Grief became fury. He chased Bellatrix, fired spells blindly, nearly gave himself to hatred, and Voldemort came. For the first time since the graveyard, Harry saw him, full, terrible, and real. The Dark Lord raised his wand, and something happened. Possession. Harry felt Voldemort in his mind, his body, his soul. But then he remembered. He remembered love, his parents, Sirius, Ron, and Hermione. He remembered what made him human. Voldemort, incapable of such feeling, recoiled. The connection broke. Dumbledore arrived. The Ministry saw. There were no more lies. Voldemort's return was undeniable. Afterward, Dumbledore spoke at last. In his office, amidst ticking instruments and ancient tomes, the truth was finally revealed. The prophecy, broken but not forgotten, spoke of a child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. It could only be Harry. One must die at the hand of the other. It was not destiny. It was choice. Harry left Hogwarts that summer, not just with scars, but with knowledge. The weight of Sirius's death ached like a phantom limb. But around that grief stood the unshakable bond of friendship. Ron's quiet loyalty, Hermione's fierce wisdom, Luna's strange serenity, Neville's stubborn courage, Ginny's fire. They had all walked through shadow, and none of them had walked alone. Back at Privet Drive, the sky stretched blue and endless, but Harry's thoughts were never still. The war was no longer a rumor. It was here. And he was no longer a boy, merely caught in its path. He was ready to stand. Harry's 6th year at Hogwarts began not with innocence, but with an air of quiet resolve. He was no longer a child wondering what lay beyond the veil of magic. Now he was a young man who had stared into darkness, who had watched those he loved fall, and who understood that war had already begun. Before returning to school, Harry stayed at the Burrow with the Weasleys. The warmth of that household, Mrs. Weasley's bustling kitchen, the twins' explosive jokes, Ginny's laughter echoing through the hall, wrapped around him like a protective charm. Yet beneath every meal, every Quidditch practice, there lingered unease. The world was growing colder, more dangerous. People were disappearing. Families were breaking. Fear hovered over every conversation. Dumbledore arrived one evening, his presence commanding and comforting all at once. He greeted Harry with that familiar twinkle in his eyes, though it now seemed dimmed by urgency. That night, they left for a mission that would define the coming months. At a quiet Muggle house, Harry and Dumbledore recruited Horace Slughorn, a potions master with knowledge essential to the war ahead. Slughorn, vain and charming, was drawn back to Hogwarts, where his love of connections might finally serve a nobler purpose. Once back at school, Harry found that things had shifted. Dumbledore took him aside for private lessons, unlike any he had ever known. Together they dove into the Pensieve, a silver basin of swirling memories. In that liquid time, Harry glimpsed the lonely boy who would become Lord Voldemort. Tom Riddle, orphaned and cunning, had learned to manipulate, to hide, to hunger for immortality. Each visit to the past revealed more: a ring, a diary, a locket, objects infused with pieces of Voldemort's fractured soul. Horcruxes. The idea chilled Harry. To split one's soul required murder, and Voldemort had done it not once, but many times. Amid these grim revelations, life at Hogwarts marched forward. Harry returned to the Quidditch pitch, now as team captain. He watched Ginny Weasley soar across the field with fire in her eyes, admired the way she laughed freely even in heavy times. that admiration blossomed into something deeper, something that warmed the cold days. Their glances lingered, and though neither spoke of it yet, something new was unfolding. Slughorn, ever collecting students like trophies, hosted elaborate parties where laughter tried to drown out dread. There, Harry tried desperately and clumsily to get the memory Dumbledore needed from the potion's master, the one Slughorn had hidden. Only with the help of Felix Felicis, a potion of perfect luck, did Harry manage to uncover it, the truth about Horcruxes, about Voldemort's quest for eternal life. Meanwhile, Harry's suspicions grew around Draco Malfoy. Once just a rival, now Draco seemed consumed by a burden he could not hide. Vanishing cabinets, secret meetings. Harry's gut told him danger was brewing, but few believed him. One stormy night, Harry and Dumbledore set out for a distant shore. Their destination? A hidden cave where one Horcrux was said to be protected by ancient curses. In that black, echoing place, Harry rowed his mentor across still waters, watched him drink a potion that made him scream, saw the cost of bravery carved into Dumbledore's trembling hands. Together, they retrieved a locket, not knowing it was a decoy, and returned broken and breathless. But Hogwarts was no longer safe. That night, the astronomy tower stood as a silent witness. Harry, paralyzed under Dumbledore's orders to remain hidden, watched helplessly as the man who had guided him through darkness was struck down by Severus Snape. Dumbledore fell, arms spread like wings, into the night, and with him fell Harry's last illusion of safety. Grief swelled through the school like a wave. Students lit their wands in tribute. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, sang a mourning song that cut through stone and sky, and Harry, wounded, furious, and hollow, stood at the edge of war. Then came the truth. In those final weeks, Harry learned of Snape's complex promise, forged long ago out of love for Lily Potter, a promise that would protect Harry, not harm him. The man he had once called enemy had all this time been a shield. The confusion twisted inside him, but slowly something else began to form, understanding. That love, even broken, even hidden, was the most powerful force of all. In those quiet days after Dumbledore's funeral, Ginny found Harry beneath the trees. He told her they could not be together. He had to go. But their hands, clasped for one last moment, said more than words. Harry left Hogwarts not for summer break, but for a mission. He would not return to school the next year. The hunt for the Horcruxes had begun. With Ron and Hermione beside him, he walked into uncertainty. But he walked forward, not back. The war was no longer waiting. In his 7th and final year, Harry Potter's journey took him far beyond the familiar walls of Hogwarts. The enchanted halls that had once offered him safety and wonder were now distant, held under the shadow of war. Yet even though he did not return as a student, the lessons he had learned within that castle about friendship, love, loyalty, and sacrifice were carried with him like armor. This final year would be a test of his courage and of the bonds he shared with Ron and Hermione, the two friends who chose to leave everything behind to stand beside him. Leaving Privet Drive for the last time was not merely a departure, it was a symbolic step away from the childhood he had known and into the dangerous, uncertain role of a hunted hero. The home where he had been confined and misunderstood became a memory, and the boy who had once lived in the cupboard under the stairs was now stepping into a world that needed him to lead. Though no longer protected by the enchantments that had kept him safe since infancy, Harry carried within him a power stronger than any charm, the knowledge that he was loved, and that love had the power to conquer fear. Autumn found the trio wandering forests, fields, and frozen rivers bound together by shared purpose to locate and destroy the Horcruxes, pieces of Voldemort's soul hidden in objects and places twisted by dark magic. Their quest was exhausting and relentless. They faced betrayal, bitter weather, and the slow erosion of hope. Tempers flared and friendships were tested, but even in moments of despair, there remained flickers of warmth. Hermione's steady reasoning, Ron's unexpected humor, and Harry's unshakable resolve. Their first major victory came after stealing into the heavily guarded home of Dolores Umbridge, where they recovered a Horcrux in the form of a locket. Though worn and weary, the trio escaped by the skin of their teeth, the locket pulsing with evil and despair. It whispered lies and darkness into their minds, straining their connection to one another. But through courage and confrontation, they overcame its influence. When Ron destroyed it, the locket shattered like a curse undone, and the night around them seemed just a little less cold. Through the long winter, they pressed on. Snow clung to the trees like ghosts, and danger stalked every step. They uncovered another Horcrux hidden within the vaults of Gringotts Bank, guarded by dragons and deception. The heist that followed was daring and near disastrous, a testament to their bravery and cunning. And yet, with every small success, Voldemort grew more aware of their progress. The darkness around them deepened, and whispers of the Dark Lord's wrath reached even the farthest corners of the magical world. Then came the revelation of the Deathly Hallows, 3 legendary objects said to make their possessor Master of Death. As Harry struggled to understand their meaning, he wrestled with the idea of power, the lure of vengeance, and the memory of those he had lost. The Hallows were not merely tools, they were tests, temptations, and in choosing not to pursue them all, Harry showed that his heart belonged not to power, but to love. Spring came with the bitter scent of war on the wind. It was then that Harry knew the final battle was drawing near. He returned with Ron and Hermione to Hogwarts, cloaked in twilight, their faces older, eyes hardened by all they had seen. The school had changed. Teachers whispered, students organized in secret, and rebellion stirred beneath the floorboards. In silence and determination, they reassembled Dumbledore's army and rallied allies. The castle prepared for siege, not as a fortress, but as a home worth defending. As the battle for Hogwarts raged, Harry pressed deeper into the castle's hidden corners, searching for the remaining Horcruxes. He ventured into the Room of Requirement, the Chamber of Secrets, and the castle's forgotten past. Each step brought him closer to Voldemort's soul, and closer to the truth of who he was. The Horcrux, in the form of the snake, Nagini, was the final piece. Guarded and deadly, she moved like a phantom in the chaos of war. In a moment of fierce courage, Neville Longbottom, once a shy, uncertain boy, rose up and struck her down, shattering the final fragment of Voldemort's immortality. But the darkest test still awaited Harry. In the Forbidden Forest, under stars hidden by smoke and sorrow, Harry walked alone to face death. In his hand was the Resurrection Stone, and with it the comforting ghosts of those who had loved him most: James, Lily, Sirius, and Lupin. Their presence gave him peace, and when Voldemort struck, Harry surrendered, not in defeat, but in selfless resolve. It was that act, not any spell that protected him. Love once again proved stronger than hate. He returned from that liminal space between life and death, unseen and unexpected. With the battle reaching its climax, Harry revealed himself and confronted Voldemort one final time in the Great Hall, now a battlefield littered with ruin and hope. Around him stood the people he had fought for, students, teachers, parents, friends, and with their strength behind him, Harry faced the man who had taken so much. Their duel was not just a clash of magic, but of ideals. Love versus hate, hope versus fear. Harry refused to strike with cruelty. He offered mercy, even as Voldemort cast the final curse. But the spell backfired, Voldemort's final act of hatred undone by his own twisted soul. In that moment, the war ended. Dawn broke over Hogwarts. The quiet that followed was not emptiness, but peace. Harry walked the grounds where his story had begun, past the lake, the towers, the trees that had watched him grow. In the echo of silence, he thought of those who had been lost and those who had survived. He held Ginny's hand, met Ron's tired eyes, and felt Hermione's arm loop gently through his. The three of them stood as they had always stood, together. Harry Potter was no longer the boy who lived. He was a man who had chosen love over power, sacrifice over safety, and hope over despair. And as the sun rose over the ruins and rebuilt dreams of Hogwarts, he stepped forward into a world forever changed by the courage of those who dared to believe in light. The years following the Battle of Hogwarts brought a rare and long-awaited calm to the wizarding world, a time of healing, rebuilding, and gentle peace. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter was free from the looming shadow of prophecy, no longer a boy marked for sacrifice, but a man granted the chance to live. The world he had fought to save was now his to enjoy. And he embraced it fully, not with fanfare or glory, but with quiet intention and heartfelt purpose. Harry returned to Hogwarts the autumn after the war, though the halls still whispered of lost voices and echoes of battle. The castle welcomed him back not as a savior, but as a student, a young man eager to complete the education stolen from him by war. There was comfort in the familiar scent of the library, in the rustle of robes down candlelit corridors, in the knowing glance of Professor McGonagall as she watched him thrive in her classroom once more. And there was healing, too, in simply being a teenager again, surrounded by friends who had become family. It was in those peaceful days that Harry's relationship with Ginny Weasley deepened. No longer bound by uncertainty or danger, their bond blossomed into something enduring and steady. Ginny, fierce and funny, with fire in her eyes and strength in her soul, reminded Harry every day of all that was worth fighting for. She had fought her own battles, carried her own scars, and now they looked to the future together with shared hope. A few years after leaving Hogwarts, Harry and Ginny were married in a quiet ceremony in the countryside. The wedding was small and filled with laughter, music, and tears, remembrances of those who could not be there, and celebrations of what they had helped make possible. It was not a wedding of heroes, but of two people deeply in love, surrounded by a world at peace. Their home in Godric's Hollow was modest, but full of life. It echoed with the sounds of laughter, broomsticks clattering, and bedtime stories told in soft voices by candlelight. When their children arrived, first James Sirius, bold and curious, then Albus Severus, thoughtful and kind, and finally Lily Luna, full of light and mischief. Harry felt something bloom in him that he had never known as a child, the quiet, powerful joy of family. Each child carried a name weighted with history, but in their everyday lives, they were simply Harry's joy and Ginny's pride. As a father, Harry was present and tender. He walked his children to platform 9 3/4, held their hands as they crossed into new adventures, and told them stories, not only of magic and monsters, but of love and loyalty, of friends who never gave up, of mistakes made and lessons learned. He never glorified the war, but he never hid it either. Albus especially often listened with wide eyes, struggling with the legacy of the names he bore. Harry would kneel beside him, place a hand on his shoulder, and remind him again and again that who we are matters more than where we come from. That kindness, bravery, and love were what defined a wizard, not bloodlines, scars, or prophecy. Professionally, Harry found a calling in justice. He joined the Ministry of Magic with reluctance at first, unsure of the institution he once distrusted. But with Hermione Granger championing reforms and Kingsley Shacklebolt guiding with wisdom, the ministry became a force for good. Harry worked his way up with quiet integrity, eventually becoming head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He used his role not to punish, but to protect. He championed the rights of magical creatures, dismantled the systems of prejudice that had once plagued their world, and ensured that no child would grow up in fear for simply being different. He never sought fame or praise, just fairness, truth, and peace. In his free time, Harry could be found in the stands at Quidditch matches, cheering loudly for his children. He exchanged letters with former classmates, visited the graves of those lost in the war, and sometimes returned to Hogwarts to give talks on defense against the dark arts. Not as a war hero, but as someone who understood fear and resilience intimately. He became a mentor to many young witches and wizards who, like him, once felt out of place or afraid. Years passed, and though the lines on his face deepened and the weight of memory never quite left him, Harry Potter remained steadfast, a man of quiet strength. He never claimed to be great, but those who knew him, who loved him, who learned from him, would say he was the kind of hero the world needed most, one who fought without hatred, who forgave without condition, who lived without pride. He was a man who remembered the past without being bound by it, a man who carried the love of his parents, the loyalty of his friends, and the sacrifices of so many in every decision he made. He never forgot the boy who lived beneath the cupboard, or the child who walked alone into the forbidden forest, or the young man who stood, trembling but unbroken, in front of the most feared dark wizard in history. But more than that, Harry Potter became a man who raised children with laughter in their hearts, who sat beside his wife beneath the stars, and who, on quiet evenings, still walked the path from the burrow to the edge of the orchard, where he could feel the wind and remember how far he had come. And so his story came to rest, not with a roar of battle, but with the hush of peace. A boy who had been born into prophecy, shaped by tragedy, and strengthened by love, had fulfilled his journey. He had changed the world not just with magic, but with compassion. In the end, Harry Potter remained not the chosen one, but the choosing one. The boy who chose love over power, friends over fear, and hope over despair. And in that choice, he gave the world its greatest gift, peace.